Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Insight Jam, your Friday special education sessions on everything, in our case, BI and data. We're going to change it up a little bit this week. Most of the Insight Jam sessions are panel-oriented, talking about current trending topics. We're going to do a deep dive on a specific technology that a lot of customers, a lot of people out there use, Power BI. Not only use, but also struggle with to optimize. So we brought together some experts on Power BI to go through some of the common Power BI challenges and pitfalls. So just a little background about us. We're from Dataleer. It's a small boutique consulting firm that helps both commercial and nonprofit organizations get more value from their data. And you can see some of our consulting clients there. We do big, we do small, mostly US, but not exclusively, nonprofit and commercial. Yeah, go ahead. So you can see the range of services that we offer on the left, but we mostly focus on data and analytics. We do a little software development as well. But our staff of much more than a dozen these days has deep expertise in building data solutions. And in fact, with the acquisition of Eckerson Group, that's my name, William Eckerson. I ran Eckerson Group for many years. We are a full service consulting firm doing everything from strategy and road mapping to data delivery and implementation. So our speakers today, yours truly, David Booth, Senior Consultant at Dataleer, and Carlos Bossy, CEO of Dataleer. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to David to kick off this presentation/discussion. And by the way, if you're in the audience live, you can use the chat to send a question or a comment, and we will bring you right into the conversation. So we encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. And I look forward to reviewing some of the common pitfalls we see throughout many of our clients and challenges that they see in solutions we've helped implement, as well as conversations we are having regularly on a day-to-day. We're really going to cover just 6 main pitfalls, but I'm really covering the life cycle or the entire environment of Power BI, not just the reporting side of things, but performance and governance as a whole. So I'm going to start high level and really kind of dive deeper on the whole tool as a whole. So really today we're going to cover workspaces that are not designed, managed, or governed. We hear this often that workspaces, it's hard to find our reports, there's no security on our environment, etc. We'll dive deeper into that. No approach for data modeling or models haven't been poorly created. Power BI is designed for a strong data model. We'll go into that. Lack of one or more golden data sets. We all hear this today. Where's our source of truth? We need a single source of truth. Power BI allows you to set that standard as source of truth and can set that up. Using the storage method, so today everyone wants the highest, the fastest, the strongest, the best performance. So really optimizing in some pitfalls we see with that, as well as developing report consistency. Every organization has challenged creating consistency across the reporting, even if it's different measures or KPIs that are being presented, but setting standards so that every user is comfortable with whatever report they're seeing. And lastly, underutilizing some Power BI reports. As I mentioned, our approach is largely based on a methodology uncovered from root causes that we see on a day-to-day. And we'll even cover some quick wins that you can cover at the end of this. So we look forward to doing this. So the first topic we're going to cover is poorly designed, managed, or governed workspaces. I wanted to bring up a case study in this scenario where we saw a Power BI environment that had nearly 2,000 workspaces. Granted, largely a lot of these were personal workspaces. Personal workspaces are workspaces assigned to the user when they're granted a license. They should not be used for production data. They really should be that single sandbox if you're testing a semantic model or testing a change before you even put it in dev. My recommendation is don't even use them. But when they did have 91 standard workspaces, they were organized by project or department. However, a lot of them had static data. Through that, we even saw over 1,100 reports and data sets, and permissions there were no permissions. People were granted access to these workspaces on a given one-off basis, allowing there to be zero or no management from a security side who actually is accessing the data or who actually is accessing that. So really the key problems of poorly designed, managed, or governed workspaces is personal workspaces should not be used for production data. If you're testing something, great, but remember to remove it after it gets deployed to production or into your development pipelines. Be consistent on your naming conventions or organizational structure. In this case, we've seen in many scenarios, there's no commonality or common structure for how you're organizing your workspaces. Is it by department or is it by project? Set that. And lastly, use development and production separately. Have a dev workspace and a production workspace. Having it together can make it much more inconsistent and hard to understand what is the source of truth, and you leverage 80 groups. So really, this is where we kind of step through how we implement best practices within Power BI workspaces. The first step is monitor and manage. Monitor and audit workspaces using to eliminate inactive workspaces. If you have static data or reports, Power BI allows you to delete or remove workspaces, and you can even set it so that if you need to reinstate it 90 days later, you can. Through that, deprecate or archive those vacant static workspaces. Use your audit logs to see what's actually being used, who's accessing what workspace, and understand who's actually going into it. This next step is standardize. Oh, go ahead.
Hey, Dave, let me insert a question here.
Okay.
That use case on the prior slide, is that an anomaly or pretty mainstream?
This one was an extreme example, but if we were to look at many of our clients prior to we helped, their situation was similar. This one I would say was an extreme scenario, but this isn't something that we're not shy from when we come in and look at someone's solution or having challenges with Power BI.
Okay.
Maybe not that many.
You also recommended that don't even turn on personal workspaces. If you do that, what are the downsides of that?
So a personal workspace, the first step is one can't manage it. So a tenant admin can't easily manage or govern someone else's personal workspace. So if I have a report that is sharing sales to the CEO, I can share that from my personal workspace, but no one's managing it. And we'll go into this, what they call the Power BI certification process. You can't certify that semantic model. And two, it only can be shared by that specific user. There's no other way to manage or govern what's happening in that workspace. It's really, if you think about it as a basic computer terminology, it's your documents folder. Maybe someone on admin can go into your computer and look at your documents, but really you own that, and it's not easily something that can be productionized or shared throughout an organization.
So you don't really want to give it to anyone except very trusted, trained users who know what they're doing.
So Power BI requires you to have every user to have a personal workspace. The organization should set rules or limitations to say users should not share data out of their personal workspace, and really don't leverage them. Set policies in places that implement users have to produce production-ready reports in defined workspaces, or what we call standard workspaces.
And can you enforce that?
You can, because you can manage using monitoring, like I bring up in the next slide. You can monitor what's actually in as a tenant admin. You can monitor what's actually in people's workspaces, and you can see if someone's sharing or setting up subscriptions to a personal workspace.
Seems like there should be more strict controls on the use of those workspaces built into the platform. But I digress. So why don't you keep going?
Yeah, no worries, and feel free to reach out throughout. But really, I think that step, really, I talk about monitoring, set up alerts with your monitoring systems to say, hey, someone is publishing and subscribing to a personal workspace report. And then you can understand if people are, or employees are using it as a production environment without following the rules that are set place in the organization. But to standardize how you set up workspaces. Workspaces even in the Microsoft documents say they should be, an organization should define a workspace based on a project, a department, and how I really look at it, does that specific topic need its own individual analytics space? And I say that because as we go into reporting standards, report applications can be a place where users can build reporting applications for only report viewers to use the reports that are approved, certified, and production ready, allowing non-power users or non-developers to access the reports and the information they need without even having to go to a workspace. And then I think always have this in mind, but build workspaces with collaboration and governance in mind. Who actually needs to do access to that workspace, and how can we make sure we're managing it to our standards? And that brings me to the third best practice is Azure Active Directory or Microsoft Entra allows you to set up security boots so you can manage the individuals as a group and not as a one-off basis. Allow access to your workspaces through AD groups and really limit the people who access workspaces to the developers or the UA analysts, the ones that are there before the main audience is viewing it. The workspaces should be really considered as an area of development where Power BI apps can be used for consumption. And I say this is if we were to jump into Power BI and there may be a production workspace that has 15 reports or 25 reports, but really today there's only 10 that matter. As a report consumer, I might not know which report to view. And by leveraging Power BI apps, I can set up the reports that are pertinent to that individual or even to that security group. And they can click on a single link and see all their reports from that given workspace instead of having to navigate navigate a workspace, which almost looks like a file folder. So you'll hear me talk about Power BI apps for report consumption throughout this presentation because it really enables the report user, it enables report consumption, and it limits confusion, especially when a user may have access to multiple workspaces. Wayne, Carlos, do you all have any questions about this, or I can jump in, pass it off to Carlos to talk about the model data aspect of things in the next pitfall?
No questions, but I was thinking that maybe you could also, in the previous slide, we also saw that data sets, or what now Power BI calls semantic models. We had almost a 1-to-1 ratio in this for this particular client between data sets and reports. And again, maybe just a quick statement about why that's not a good practice. We want data sets or semantic models typically to be reused. If we're creating a new one for every report, everything is essentially built as a one-off, and I'm not able to reuse relationships that have been already defined in other data sets or semantic models. I'm not able to use DAX code that's already been developed. So I think that's one of the things that we also look for is that ratio of reports to data sets should be, when people ask us what should it be, it's hard to say, but it should be 50-to-1 or 100-to-1 or 20-to-1, but not 1-to-1.
Makes a lot of sense.
Mesh is a material built to be strong and flexible. Mesh is an interaction creating alignment and power. Mesh is a behavior that brings people together. And now Mesh is a new model of trust networks from InsightJam, driven by enterprise experts for professional decision makers who recognize the moment we are in, where the world of work collides with AI. The greatest mesh of all.
Carlos, I think that's a good headway into where we want you to kind of discuss. And the first step to make that single source of truth, or that what we call golden data set or golden semantic model, it starts with how your data is modeled and how you provide the data to Power BI. What are some common pitfalls you see when we jump into a new client where they're struggling with Power BI, specifically their data architecture side of things?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we often see is very little data modeling has taken place, or no data modeling. And, and if we kind of go back to the start, when somebody is first implementing Power BI, they often see a demo or write a small report that's not terribly complex, and it works. Things can be Some of these practices can be avoided or ignored when the situation is not terribly complex. And often we talk about data being big. We talk about large data and things changing because data is bigger versus small data. Things also change when data is not complex, and then it goes to being very complex. If I'm shown a small file with a few categories and a measure or two, and I can easily import that into Power BI and start reporting on it immediately without thinking about it very much. And I didn't have to do anything to the data. But in more complex situation, in most enterprises, data lives in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. And for reporting to take place properly, it needs to be transformed. It's not stored for reporting when it's stored in these other places. And so we need to store it for reporting in a different way. And that transformation has to take place at some level. When we see data on a report, it's been heavily transformed typically in one way or another. It could have been done closer to the source. It could have been done in an ETL process or an ELT process. It might have been done when the data is being loaded into the report. So working with data that's properly modeled makes building those reports much, much easier. And it also makes it so that I can reuse data and reuse what I build for more than one report, so that then that data set to report ratio is much higher than that 1-to-1. So one of the things we often see, some of the bullet points we have listed here, I'll talk about a couple of them, is often we see tables, data being used directly from the source systems. And again, on a very simple use case, that can work. But once you get beyond a simple and you get to 1,000 reports and enterprise-wide BI reporting, that becomes very, very difficult. Even the data is not modeled in the source system for reporting, and that's often the main problem. The main problem is that we need to transform the data so it's good for reporting, and then often we need to integrate it with other data from other systems. We don't have the right relationships between tables. When we load the data, or when we see data being loaded, there's often complex calculations taking place to load the data properly and create new columns, calculated columns for that. So what we're doing when we don't have data that's stored for reporting or modeled for reporting is we're transforming it as we load it and transforming it as we display it. That can often be very slow, very difficult, and often it just is difficult to get correct. That data is never correct. So what we like to do is we like to say, how do we model data properly for reporting? And again, on a small scale, I could take a flat table and load it into Power BI and it'll work, or on a simple scale, I guess I would say better than that. And there's a few other data model types that I can use, but essentially the star schema is what works best for complex Power BI reporting. If I have a well-built, well-modeled star schema using facts and dimension tables, Power BI will understand it. That's one thing that's a big advantage. It'll understand that the measures in the fact needs to be summed or aggregated or averaged by the dimensions that are related to that fact. It makes the DAX simple. A lot of the DAX just falls into place. I don't have to do filtering or other calculations in my DAX to get the right answers. And it allows me to develop much faster, and it allows me to reuse data sets better, and then ultimately create golden data sets that make sense across the enterprise. So we're advocates for good models, good data models, and that's one thing I think DataLear always focuses on. But often that's not the way a system is built. You know, Power BI starts off small in an organization. It grows to different teams. It grows across the enterprise, and the models aren't built appropriately as Power BI usage grows. And ultimately, from an enterprise point of view, it becomes very difficult to get it right. So we'll talk a little bit more about star schemas, but ultimately, for the more complex situations and enterprise type situations, that's where you get the best bang for the buck in developing your reports.
So I guess, Carlos, that Power BI is so pervasive and easy to use. That's also its downfall in some ways, because people don't realize that to do something more complex, once they get to that level, they need a lot more skills than they probably have, the modeling skills.
That's
fair?
true. Yeah, and that's true. And like I said, I often blame even the demos or the blogs you see out there that show you how to get started with Power BI, because again, they're going to show you an easy example. You know, they're not going to show you the example with, 300 tables and how do I get data from 300 tables into a report in Power BI. And they're going to show you the example that has one table and 4 columns. And so those kind of things, they kind of fool you a little bit. I mean, it's valid that that can be very simple, but you're right. I mean, I think the simplicity of getting started is also what drives things in the wrong direction in the future as Power BI gets deployed throughout the enterprise. And then we see reports taking a much longer time to develop. We see import times being much slower, failing a lot. In this particular use case that we're talking about here, we saw that a lot of people actually bypassed the Power BI production import process and ran reports on their own desktop because there were so many failures.
And Carlos, I think one thing to add, Wayne, is Power BI says it can do transformations or allows you to transform the data within the semantic model. However, the complexity is that as your data grows, as you're trying to maybe model it on demand, goes back to Carlos's point where refresh takes so much longer, because now you're asking Power BI to be a visualization tool, that semantic layer, and a reporting tool. And when we dive into performance a little bit, that's one area where I can say Power BI was designed for simple relationships. That hierarchical relationship, it's much more challenging for it to handle on large scale cases. And that's why we believe modeling the data really will help set you up for success. And so I think Carlos will go into the next dimensional modeling for best practices in the next slide, but really understanding that Power BI is that visualization tool really will help set you up for success, versus it's not that all-in-one tool that can transform your data, get it into the right data types, and even calculate values. Do that. Use your data warehouse or your upstream ETL process to do that, because that's where the power really is.
Yeah. Or except for simple use cases, then you want to model and transform the data in the database.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing I will say is, I think as a general rule, that's true. And one exception that I always tell our clients, I think is a valid exception, is sometimes I need data today. And I have an engineering team or a process that makes it much slower to get it into my enterprise data lakehouse or data warehouse. And it's valid in my mind as a as an immediate need to say, I can add that data and import it through Power BI, transform it in such a way where it'll line up or merge together or integrate together with the data I have in my data lakehouse. And if I can do that, I'm off and running, right? I can get moving much faster than waiting for the enterprise process to catch up with me. Again, ultimately, from a governance point of view, that data should ultimately end up in the data warehouse or the data lakehouse and be transformed at the database level before Power BI sees it. But on a one-off basis, it's a way to get something done quickly that I need today. But as a general rule, if I can, I would rather do most of my complex transformations not in Power BI, because once Power BI becomes your transformation tool, it becomes your ETL tool, and it just wasn't meant to be that kind of tool.
Yeah. So one thing on the governance side that we found really works is to distinguish between those two types of reports. One that has been delivered through standardized modeling techniques and verified and certified. And that should carry some kind of a watermark or seal indicating it's been through the proper channels and processes. Whereas the ad hoc report that you just described obviously plays an important role in getting the business information it needs when it needs it. But it shouldn't carry that watermark or seal. And that's kind of the defining signal to users, to understand whether to trust that data wholly or not. And what we found is that if you do that and you apply these watermarks or signals to reports, the users very quickly become, they demand that the information that they receive to do analysis has that watermark on it. So it gives a little bit more incentive for the ad hoc developer or analyst to kind of go through the channels when necessary.
That makes a lot of sense. And Power BI allows you to certify data sets, but even certifying reports will allow you to have that governance or watermark approach. Carlos, I'm going to jump to the next slide so you can dive deeper into some dimensional modeling best practices.
I'll go through this quickly because this really isn't intended to be a class on dimensional modeling. That's obviously another session in and of itself, but we just want to kind of make the case for why a dimensional model does work well in Power BI with the proper relationships and the proper models under the hood. It simplifies aggregations, relationships. You don't even have to think about those in Power BI; it just knows about them, right? It just automatically picks them up. What the fact that your data is modeled differently in the source data is not relevant at this point because you've modeled it now for analytics and reporting. You don't need to write custom queries, and the data is already transformed. And Power BI and other reporting tools this model has become ubiquitous over the years, so they get it. When they see a model like this and relationships like this, things just work well. So essentially, the things you should look for is if your data is modeled correctly in this way, is do you have calculated columns? If it's modeled properly, you'll have very few calculated columns. You'll have all your measures in measure tables. It's a way to develop the system so that you can find measures easily and create. In the little diagram we have it on the right, we kind of show that we have a star schema, but with a measures table over to the right. So it's a way to find all the measures that the dimensional model already delivers to you easily over there, and you can easily drag them into your report when you need them. We can also create role-playing dimensions. So for example, if I have multiple dates in my fact tables, I can use those dates differently because I can create those as role-playing dimensions when the data set is created. I can also hide things that I don't want users to see or use that are really unimportant to them, like surrogate keys or other types of things that we might use to organize the data or organize dimensions. And so and then we can provide proper formatting. So once we set up a semantic model in this way, most of what an analyst would need, or a report developer might need, a business report developer might need, is there for them out of the box. They almost don't need to do anything. Most of what they would need to do would be only to create new DAX or new measures that can only be viewed in the context of their own views. Ratios that are based on the average divided by the average of something else. Those kind of things need to be calculated at visualization time, essentially. So DAX can do that.
It's really, once that star schema is set up and we've implemented the star schema to create those specific tables for role-playing dimensions, we've avoided calculated columns or transformations, we've built the more complex measures like percentages or ratios, you're really setting up that user for success. And if you don't, this slide feeds into my next slide of creating that golden data set or golden semantic model. But if you implement your semantic model using the star schema, creating specific tables for role-playing dimensions. So if you have multiple date fields, there's multiple date tables. You're avoiding calculated columns, and you formatted your report so that it is intended for the end user and is intended for consumption. You have allowed to you've set yourself up for success with one, trusted data that has been engineered, modeled properly, but also simplified the use so that analyst can drag and drop those measures, or drag and drop just the sums and do those on-demand sums. So with that said, unless there's, Wayne, you have other questions on the dimension model inside, just for a matter of time, I want to jump to really setting best practices and going back to that conversation Carlos started with reducing that data set to improving your data set to report ratio. So the golden data set is really a term that is, let's call it your single source of truth. You've defined your semantic model with a star schema. Maybe it's a data mart on sales, or it's that enterprise data warehouse star schema where it's got multiple facts, multiple dimensions with cross facts, with joins that go across different dimensions. But as you see in this current case study we've brought up, their report, they had 1,100 reports and 1,100 data sets, nearly a 1-to-1 report ratio. That means for every report, you're creating a semantic model where you've written code, imported a specific spreadsheet, or you're creating custom logic for every report. I think the biggest struggle with that, and something we see common, is I show up to a sales meeting with one sales number. My colleague shows up to at the same meeting with a different sales number from a different report. How do I know what's right? What is the true number? And so by setting a single golden semantic model where I as a sales developer, as a data analyst, can drag in sales, and sales is defined as sales, as in a governance system would allow, that single report that single semantic model, now our golden data set, which has been certified, can support beyond just that single report. It can support many sales reports, or many, it can go beyond, it can have sales and expenses in a single semantic model, and allowing users to know, again, back to your conversation, Wayne, or your point about certified or watermark, it allows that we know where this sales calculation has been agreed upon from from the business, and this is how we're going to calculate sales going forward. So when you don't have a golden data set, or you don't have those single sources of truth of semantic models, every report is going to be inconsistent. The calculation for sales will be different than throughout. And so that becomes one, what is the truth? What is the actual sales number? What is the actual KPI? And a maintenance nightmare for the developers. How, as 124 users have created 1,000 different reports, how do I know who's managed that, who's developed that? And setting a consistent standard for that allows for one, the business to trust the data, the business to trust the analytics team, and allows for those deeper problem solving, deep analytics cases where you might want to dive deeper into the data and you have that single source of truth. So in this scenario, we saw almost a 1-for-1 report ratio, and every single report was writing SQL for it, but that SQL was slightly different on every one. But all that was really changing was maybe a sales region or a specific sales product that they were presenting. Well, that can easily be addressed with one, a strong data model, but two, having the right calculations in that right golden data set in place so that a report developer can drag and drop and then add filters for the product, the sales region, or the delivery area. And then that reduces that one data set can support all 23 of these reports in this scenario, whereas before it was 4 data sets for 23 reports, which is, it's better, but not, if you go look at the full 1-to-1 ratio, it's much more of a challenge and much more to govern and maintain. So before I go on to the next slide about building that golden data set, Wayne, do you have any questions, or does the audience have any idea you want to point out?
No, this makes just absolute sense, common sense, but it's hard to implement, I think, in the rush of business. So
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge, right? The rush of business. I need that report yesterday is a mindset we all see and experience on a day-to-day basis. But again, with building that or defining that golden data set for self-service, you're taking that consumption-based approach. And at DataLear, we develop in a consumption-based approach. We want to say, how do you need your data? When do you need your data? How do you want it? And building that semantic model. So it's not, when we built it for a use case, we know it can answer more than just that use case, because we always know as soon as you start, you have access to the data, you want more, or you want to see it a different way. So again, it starts with a strong data model, but it also allows for consistency and, again, enabling self-service. I think a lot of organizations choose Power BI because they sell it on that self-service tool to drag and drop, not complex, right? As a user who's connected to a semantic model and has built that drag and drop report, it is great if it's set up right. So really always have that management inside, define business needs. Obviously, not every organization can have one golden data set. There may be data that's only for the HR team, but define those specific use cases or data march or areas of data that you want to certify that data. Really set that workspace. When we go back upstream, if you've defined your workspaces, there should really only be that analytic space. There should only be one semantic model or golden data set that supports that analytics space when we say workspace. And maybe there's ones that there's a single data set that supports multiple of those. And that's an ideal scenario, but oftentimes I say, and we have a bullet point here, use 1 or 2 golden data sets per workspace. Ideally, you have no more than 1, because that analytic space can be supported by that single global sales workspace for this example here. But really then sets the rule and the definition of where's the numbers coming from a governance perspective, who's using that, what reports are being shared, and how they're leveraging the data. So, and then there's security settings you can set in place for users or security groups that maybe you're in sales and you can't see North America region. You can just see APAC. We can set rules in places using the dimensional model to limit what a user sees. So really defining that use case, really, I'm kind of bringing this full circle here of you set your workspace, which is your analytical subject area, define that, build that strong star schema or analytics, that data model, build that single source where you've defined defined your relationships, your data. If you built some business required agreed upon definition measures for sales or other ratios. And now you can support all reporting needs off that single golden data set. And on top of that, as you roll out changes or improvements to that model, schedule regular meetups with the self-service users. We see that problem rather frequently is the BI department or the analytics team is constantly improving what's available for users, but users don't know what's available. So have lunch and learns, have office hours. We've seen success where once a month training to say, hey, this is what's new in Power BI from a features, but also what's new from what we've released with detailed release notes, allows that data literacy or that conversation to grow, and the trust in that single self-service data set, that it's not static or it's not just sitting there, that the business is thinking about it.
Perfect.
So,
All right, we have about 20 minutes left, so let's.
yeah, I can keep moving. I can talk about this forever. So the next pitfall we see quite regularly is everyone wants their reports to be the fastest, and choosing the right storage method for your business is a very important topic. And to be frank, it's really dependent on the business needs, the size of the data, even the license you have in Power BI. But in short, the argument is always import versus direct query. One, import's always going to be faster. You're loading data into the Power BI Vertipack engine. It can query that. It's meant to query that. Where direct query is that live dependency on that source system. So if you're using whatever technology is, that connection is open. And so when you execute a report, it's writing the SQL or the code against that. But then there's also the composite mode. There's the composite mode and dual mode, but the composite mode is where you start mixing storage method on table types. We've actually seen this in large scenarios be the most beneficial. However, I think the best practice here, or the challenges here, is really defining the business needs and the size of that, the use case. So we often see common storage method mistakes, direct query with complex DAO calculations. That's challenging, right? The Power BI engine is now querying the database on demand when you're looking at the report, but then also having to transform or calculate in sense writing challenging SQL queries to then aggregate the data on need. Not considering the source system capabilities. Maybe your data warehouse is not as great for that type of analytics. It might not be as great for this direct query, or it might be better for import. Mixing storage methods without understanding the implications. If you do mix import and direct query, how that data is being sent back to the data warehouse or the SQL engine is much different in how it's going to do it if you combine dual mode and direct query. So really making sure you understand how it's working will allow you to set up the best. And then other errors we see is trying to say a live connection on an Excel file and a SharePoint. Power BI is not great at that. Use import mode, just load that data into the Power BI model. And then obviously using import data when you need real-time data. Import data is only refreshed when the semantic model is refreshed, not when the report is looked at. So again, defining what you need from the business will allow you to set up the best or the optimized storage methods. So then you optimize performance and optimize resources as a whole. The next slide kind of jumps into best practices, but the answer is it really depends, and understanding the impact is the first step. And I could do a whole slideshow on this topic alone. So Wayne, I don't know if we want to dive deeper, but with just 15 minutes left, I can keep going.
Well, why don't you show the next slide and do a quick summary?
Yeah, so when to use, if your data set's small, import mode is always the best solution. It's going to compress that data as a column or database in the Vertipack engine, but it's always going to be the fastest. Without a doubt, it's going to be the fastest. But but it requires specific timing and scheduling of refreshes. Freshness. How often do you need your data? Import mode, if you have yesterday's sales and you're only refreshing once a day, again, great. Direct query allows you to have those steady refreshes. That refresh allows you to see what the data is based on the last anytime that. So it's sending a SQL query every time. It allows for that real-time data. However, you won't see the performance as it is. Again, import mode, I've repeated this multiple times, but it's the fastest. DAX is limited with direct query. There are certain DAX calculations that don't work with direct query, but only work in import mode. However, I've leveraged direct query for most of my clients. These DAX, the DAX that's available for direct queries should be sufficient for if your data is modeled correctly. And lastly, the data type, the data source. Import mode works with almost anything. If you even need to do an API, it can send that API and refresh on that need. Direct query is really defined for that live database connection, built for that with really modeled data. So my decision framework is optimize your performance and full functionality. I start generally with import mode, and as I realize the refresh times, I might start moving to that hybrid approach. I use direct query often with my fact tables and dual mode. So dual mode is import mode with a live connection still there from my dimension tables. That one will send the best SQL back to the engine when data needs to be, when that fact table is hit, but also allows for the quick response on dimension tables. Never use direct query with static files. It's not defined for that. You'll often have issues with connections, especially as if a user doesn't have access to that specific file. And so I often say, consider composite models, import or dual mode for those dimension tables and direct query, or if your fact tables aren't that large, dual mode for fact tables. This is where you have to start using tools like DAX Studios or other things to really define testing how your model's working and how the query performance is. Additionally, if you're really seeing challenges with performance, we have a whole nother session on aggregate tables for large fact tables so that you can return fast performance and not have to aggregate every level of grain of your fact.
Yeah, that's one thing I would add is just that when direct query is needed and it puts more pressure on the source, the database, and it makes it that the database has to be well optimized as well to make sure that you're getting good response there.
Unlock better leads through Solutions Review events.
Welcome to Data Demo Day. Expert Roundtable, Solution Spotlight featuring Monte Carlo, Cohesity, Denodo, Cloudflare, High Gear, Broadcom, Next Thing.
Boost your brand with a webinar that shares comprehensive use cases, real-time product demos, and an interactive Q&A. All broadcast live to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Zoom from our Boston studio, or even on location. Fill your sales funnel with high-quality targeted leads. And contact us today by visiting solutionsreview.com/virtual events.
The next pitfall, as I've come down the funnel of Power BI from Workspaces all the way to semantic models, is no standards for reporting. We're highlighting the inconsistencies or the challenge of using Power BI, which makes Power BI hard and the users don't want to use it. So what we often see is there's no reporting standards. Every developer has their own design approach. Different metrics are used to calculate across different reports. On a branding side of things, there's no consistency for color schemas or visual hierarchy. No report is designed the same, so the UI makes it challenging. No definition of business logic, and reports not optimized for different devices. We're all on the go today, so being able to leverage Power BI, it has an app to use on your phone, but on your tablet, but also on your computer. As a report developer, we need to consider that. So really setting those standards, user experience will struggle if there's not a consistent reporting standard. It takes longer to develop a report if you don't have every report developed from scratch. If you have to develop every report from scratch. if I develop one report and a team member needs to maintain it or fix it, if it's inconsistent from another team member, it creates more in the backlog and creates more challenges in the maintenance cycle. Trust, right? If we have different numbers on different reports, no one's going to trust our report. And finally, from a brand perspective, if one report doesn't look like another report in a similar organization, you can have inconsistent visuals appear unprofessional or just lack of production ready. So I can jump into what we say is our reporting standards, but Wayne, obviously you've done a lot of research in the world of this. So I'd be interested if you have any questions or feedback on some of these other inconsistencies or reporting consistencies you've seen.
No, that's a pretty good summary, pretty detailed. So I'm actually pretty curious about what your standards are on the next slide.
So again, we're focused largely on Power BI here, less so on theory, but there's something called a PIDT file, which is a theme. So create and distribute report templates. This allows for easy formatting, color standards, font settings, defining organizational color palettes. One thing we do as a team at Data Leaders, we always make sure to get their branding guides from the get-go. So we're not developing a report and then having to rebrand it after. Establish standard layouts and navigation patterns. A dashboard to me should be simple to read, but have enough information so that a user may want to click and drill down. So setting that format of how it looks, the look and feel, will set the standards for all dashboards at your organization. Require mobile optimized views for all reports. We know executives and leaders are on the go all the time. Start from that and it lets less work down the line. And lastly, share those best practices for your teams and your data types. If you want 0 sig figs on certain numbers, make sure that format is done in the semantic model so that it stays that way. The next step is really calculation standards. Let's define how we're calculating and how we write our DAX consistently for both simplicity, but also how they're named. I want to be able to know what I'm looking at and it not having to be like, well, I think this is what this measure is doing. So add descriptions. Again, create that central library. If you have a data catalog, leverage the ability to connect Power BI to that to see how DAX is then, and establish that standard for time intelligence calculations. Maybe you need more dynamic ones that are based on a selection, or you can leverage the Power BI ones. And finally, set that report certification process for production deployment. Has this been approved? Kind of that watermark that it's good. Require that documentation of purpose, audience, and refresh schedule, and make sure everything loads within acceptable time frame. I think oftentimes we'll build a beautiful report, but it's not there. Or we'll inherit a really great looking report, but it's doing too much or it's too complex, so it's not that. And constantly review this. So that monitoring side thing is we go design, build, deploy, monitor. The monitoring aspect of this allows for us users to make sure reports are being used and delivered and staying with the expectations we have as an organization.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I think Wayne, we've leveraged your knowledge on this, so we hopefully hit some of your points. And then the last pitfall is underutilizing Power BI resources and licensing. We all know that there's 3 types of licenses today: Pro, Premium per user, and Premium capacity. Premium per user and Premium capacity offer very similar usage and features. Premium per user is just a per user cost, where Premium capacity, you're now using Fabric as your Power BI tool. One is understanding what the business needs. Pro licenses are usually assigned to people who need to view reports, and that's what they're meant for. However, you can be a developer with Pro. You just might not have all the features such as deployment pipelines within the service, and some smaller limits on semantic model size. Premium capacities are often where it gets a little more challenging, where if you're in the premium per capacity, you need to make sure you're managing that compute, that you have access to your own dedicated compute, so that year one, you can assign compute to specific workspaces, not assign it to personal workspaces. You're not managing, you're using refreshes unnecessarily, and you're not leveraging other things in premium like paginated reports and sometimes data flows, which can help bring in data faster. So really understanding who's your audience and how you assign this will make sure you are maximizing your spend on Power BI. Premium capacity users should be able to just view all users. You're paying for a capacity, and so you don't need a license, but the pro and per user are both, I think, $14 and $24 a month for that. So it's really understanding that and making sure pro users are maybe just the ones who are using the app to consume data, where premium workspaces, premium per users or premium capacity users are the power users. However, if you're starting from nothing, pro will answer 90% of your questions to start. But just for a matter of time, I'm going to jump into some monitoring for continuous improvement. You've heard me talk about monitoring is key to the success of your Power BI environment. There's available monitoring tools built into the system right away. There's feature usage and adoption for every single report, so you can see what report is being used and how they're monitoring it. If you have a capacity, monitor how your capacity is using and ensure you're not going into throttle mode, because that will slow your performance down. And then if you need a bit more detail or you want a whole tenant level monitoring report, we highly recommend using the monitoring APIs. And we have a list here, and we can share this document out. And for many of the organizations we partner with, we've created a Power BI monitoring workspace where we've ingested the Power BI data to allow for quick adoption and understand who's actually using what and keeping our environment on top of our environment, so we don't have static workspaces or static reports. And how do we get to that path of Power BI excellence? We're all sitting here and looking at the pitfalls, but there's easy ways to adjust this. Let's look right away. Let's look at our quick wins. What workspaces are being used? Let's look at our data sets or semantic cloud status. Are there data sets that are being used that are duplicated across the tenant? Check if a user is actually using Power BI and document top performance issues. That high level assessment can allow you to quickly implement solution changes and optimize over the next several months. So we have a lot of arrows going on here, but really the next is let's set in the first month, let's set some standards. Let's implement workspace naming. Aim to start creating that golden data set. Creating that first golden data set may take some model and set up directory AD active security groups so that you can manage how people view data and audiences and apps through a single area and not manage one by one. Deploy your Power BI app. Set consumption to be a Power BI app versus navigating people to a workspace, and start implementing report standards. So build that report template, set the rules on that. That will allow you to set up as the next 3 months as you can complete that workspace consolidation. You have that trusted golden data set. You've optimized your performance through storage messages, and you've activated license features where necessary. And you've started to talk about implementing monitoring. That will allow you to really have that executive sponsorship, center of excellence, and start implementing regular training sessions so you can get to that. Again, remember, we got to start small, but once you start achieving those wins, you'll build momentum, and your Power BI environment will really become that true source of the analytical system. So with that said, thank you for your time today, and if there's any questions, feel free to reach out.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you, Carlos. That was wonderful. Obviously shows your deep expertise in this area, not just Power BI, but data modeling, data management. So thank you for sharing your expertise, and thank all of you for listening.